So, welcome everyone to Creating Spaces for Powerful Writers and Powerful Writing. We're so glad you're here. As you can see, we have 4 separate tables set aside for different grade levels. And so we're excited to be able to create this as a workshop. I'm going to have just a few opening comments, and then we're going to spend the bulk of the time in discussions at tables specific to your grade level, and hope that you're able to leave this session with ideas that you can take straight to your classroom and how to create powerful writers. We have 2 guiding questions that we're considering during this session. What does it mean to create a space for writers? And then how can educators curate a space that encourages and produces powerful writing practices? So right now in education, there's a lot of discussion about creating capable writers, and a lot of focus on standards, which we do need to have capable, strong writers. But our question today is really about how can we create powerful writers who understand the power of the pen. It's one of the most powerful tools we have, and we want to make sure that the students that leave our classrooms understand the power they have as writers. And so that includes, we hope to create writers that give voice to those whose voices are hidden, and to focus on justice and fairness. But then another piece of what we're discussing today is the physical space as well in our classrooms, and how that contributes to the power that we are giving our students, and the mindset that we have as teachers about our own students and their power as writers. So in thinking about physical space, we'll be considering things like the furniture, the floor space and how you arrange your classroom, wall space, different areas of your classroom, materials and supplies, and different ways, different types of materials that you may not have considered before. And also scheduling, things like your daily schedule, your weekly, monthly schedule, and how you kind of conceptualize the work that you're doing with students, and how time factors in, because that's really, it's the thing that I think we are struggling with the most as teachers, is finding time. So what we do with our time is critical. So how do we spend that time, and how do we schedule in ways that lend the most power to students? So I wanted to share with you a short little poem that is a poem from Loris Malaguzzi, who was the founder of the Reggio Emilia approach in Italy. And this video, it's only a couple minutes long. It features preschool and very young children, because is focus, but I want you to think, because we have a lot of folks here from the middle grades, upper elementary and high school, think about the words and how this applies to our discussion today about powerful writers and powerful writing. And, oh. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm going to try it this way and see. Well, we may not be able to do that if we can't only duplicate. There we go. So, our work today is to think about how we can, as teachers in charge of the spaces in which our students write, how can we allow those 100 languages to flourish? What do we build? How do we create spaces that allow that, regardless of the age of your students? So, that is what we are about to discuss in our small groups. So, we're excited that you're here. I'm going to introduce my co-presenters. We are broken into table groups. If you just arrived, we're broken into table groups by grade level. So over here in the front corner will be pre-K through second grade discussion, and I'll be leading that. My name is Heather Wall. I'm a teacher, a Red Clay teacher consultant. And then right here, going in order, grades 3 through 5 will be with Marissa Williams. So she'll be working with anyone working with or interested in grades 3 through 5. Middle school, grades 6 through 8, will be Keith Miller. Thank you, excellent. And then high school will be with Jesse Evans. Wonderful. So what we plan to do is spend the next while discussing at our tables and kind of working together, coming up with great ideas, and then we're going to meet back together as a whole group at about 10:30, which will leave us about 15 minutes to share out tables about what you discussed and what your ideas were. So be prepared to be kind of sharing towards the end what really stood out to you and what was most helpful to you, okay? Any questions about how we're doing? Excellent. We're so glad you're here, and let's join in the discussion.
My name is Jesse Evans. I teach American Government and Civics at Cedar Shoals High School. Am I familiar with this area at all? So,
we are here to talk about fostering fearlessness. So one of the things before we get started I want you to think about is, why do you teach? So we'll think about that for just about 60 seconds. And what I want you to do is I want you to go past the conversation of, I want to hear children. I want, it's not about you, it's why do you teach? So take about 60 seconds and think about that, because you're going to need all of that and then some to kind of think through some of the cool strategies that you'll bring back to your classroom. As you are thinking about why you teach, I want you to envision one kid, one source of inspiration. Have one kid, always the kid with his head down, or the girl who likes to talk back a little bit because they kind of keep my life interesting. But take 60 seconds and just think about that silently. Why do you teach? And then I'm going to add another question. Why do you keep teaching? Is it the same reason? Is there a different reason? Okay, so final layer is, what will make you stop teaching? What will make you stop teaching? Okay, we're not going to share any of that quite yet. I don't know, I may do it later. I'm a fan of trick questions, so we'll see how that circles back. So a little bit about myself. I run a creative writing and youth leadership program in Savannah, Georgia called Block by Block. It's actually focused on only high school students, but the Deep Center also teaches middle school students in the schools as well. So I often do some consulting with them too, okay? So as I said, my theme for today is fostering fearlessness. So if we had to define, what is fearlessness? Somebody?
Not being afraid.
Okay, not being afraid?
Yeah.
Okay.
Taking risks.
Taking risks. What else?
Jumping right in without knowing what's going to happen, where you're going.
Okay, say that one more time.
Jumping right in.
Jumping right in. What about this side over here? I'm feeling a little lonely over here. Fostering. What is fearless? Fearlessness. What is that? What does it look like?
Not being afraid, jumping in if something.
Okay, so not being
Willing to change.
being willing to change, having the courage to do something you don't normally do. Anything else that pops out? Is fear still a part of the equation in fearlessness? Yes, I think fear is very necessary. I think oftentimes when we talk about fearlessness, it's like how to not be afraid, how to be strong. You need the fear. Fear is this human self-preservation act. Sometimes it's useful, so you don't want to go and pet a lion that just happens to wander into your yard. First of all, if it's wandering into your yard, there's a whole other conversation, right? But what we're going to focus on is how do you take your learners? How do you empower them to do so? Let me start by saying this. What do you think is required for fearlessness to even happen? It's the number one thing that has to happen first.
Feeling safe.
Feeling safe.
I just said secure.
Security. What else? Comfortable. What else?
Trust.
Trust. And where does all this come from? Confidence. Where does all this come from?
Relationships.
Relationships.
The teacher, you've got to create that.
Bingo. So in order for you to, one thing that I always say is I won't ask anything of my young artists that I won't do myself. Okay? So if we're going to have a dance party, as I hate sometimes the music we have to use, I will dance along. And I always give my youth an option to out in a very creative way. So when I did a dance party at Camp Red Clay this past summer, I have some of my kids, and it happens with high schoolers too, they're a little too cool for school or for the dance party because we're all afraid of humiliation in some fashion, way, or form. So I always tell people, go find a corner. Go face the corner. First of all, it's about reclaiming punishment spaces, right? Because when often I think about middle school or school in general, it was not a fun experience. It was all about punishment. It was all about me feeling stupid, right? So the whole point, I feel like we as educators, what we're here to do is also to reclaim the negative experiences that our youth have and replace them with other experiences that build them up, okay? So, few things. We're about to go into some specific strategies, but I want to first start by saying language is often the barrier, meaning how you refer to your students is the first step. So if I refer to, oh my goodness, hey, how are you? Hey kids. First of all, I don't know one middle schooler or high schooler who likes to be called a kid. So we actually we don't refer to our students as even students or kids, we call them young artists, okay? So that is one important step on seeing where they are right now and where you want them to be. Key language. So how I connect with you is how you will then feed back into me. Names are important. I cannot say enough how important it is for you to know your student's name and how to say it. Oftentimes students feel silenced, ignored, uncomfortable if you don't say their name right, okay? Now we have creative names out there from different cultures, from different backgrounds. The first step to creating trust is to honor a person's heritage, which starts with their name. So even if you butcher it a few times the first time, ask that student, can I get it right? Can you work with me on it? And even if sometimes there are snickers in the classroom, your job is to give their name is a crown. So you start by initiating trust by allowing that crown to be placed where it's supposed to be instead of spelling out the name when you don't know how to say it or skipping over it or rushing through it. That, believe it or not, you will be on their list for the rest of the year if you do that, okay? 2 is embracing the boy or girl with their head down, okay? So when I first started educating, I've done college and middle school and high school. I would always get very irritated if a student put their head down in front of me. I would be like, oh, you ignoring me? Is that what this is about? But I realized that if I made that about me. It's not about me. The question is, why is the head down on the desk? So I often do not refer to myself as a teacher or an educator. I refer to myself as a village maker, okay? A village maker to me is a person who is about creating networks and understanding. So if my student Jacob puts his head down on the desk, I'm gonna let him put his head down on the desk, and I'm gonna find and create a way to circle back to him in a way that's low stakes to make sure, 1, he's okay. 2, if he's not in the mood for any of this today, what can he do? What will he do? And what can we do together? Okay? So here are some strategies. I mentioned earlier, I live by the philosophy of co. So my background is actually in marketing. So this is kind of like my thing. So colon, meaning co-creator, co-artist, co-experiencer, co-leader. Oftentimes this idea of education as teacher is I am standing up in front of you guys, the banking model of education. I'm imparting wisdom into you so that you can do better, you can be better. All that is a bit of a farce to me, but we'll move on. So co meaning that the only difference between you and your student is probably some skill sets and age, right? That's the only thing you bring to the table, but that doesn't make your lived experience any more privileged, any more important than theirs. So finding those opportunities for our youth to bring their worlds into the classroom and use that as a place of source and inspiration. So raise your hand if you identify as an artist. Whoa. One? That's a problem, y'all. Okay? That's a problem. Let me tell you why. So one of the first times I do when I meet students is I say, are you an artist? And they respond the same way. I'm like, okay. Now I'm going to ask you guys, can you write? Raise your hand if you can write. Literally can write, like write your name. That's what I'm talking about. Okay? Raise your hand and listen. Okay? Raise your hand if you can draw. Not like draw. You know, I'm talking about a doodle, maybe a little bubble letter. Everybody, right? It's about making what the content is and what they're meant to do more accessible, okay? Not lowering the standards. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is making it something that they can understand outright, that they have already what they need to do to be able to do it. So, everyone in this page?
We're talking about that right now. We actually just lost a grant by one vote to have all new furniture. And of course, in private school, you know, we don't have any extra monies either. It seems like you would, but in our particular one, we don't. But we have they actually, the furniture people came to us and said, resend this in. And so with that, you know, we had, oh gosh, the desk, you know, the chairs that rolled, so we could get them into groups, so we could do more. You know, when you were talking about the kids getting on the floor and writing, I have 22 sixth graders, I guess, and 20 fifth graders come into my room. I have old desks, those big old desks. They're a little too big to get under their desk. I have no room to do that creative kind of piece. And so, you know, my creative writing is like journaling, where they get to come in and journal, or I give them a prompt, and they love to share it. But with that, I teach my Bible in my 55 minutes. I teach, you know, maybe 20, 15 minutes, and then the grammar and the writing. So, you know, I want so much to do more. That's why I'm here, get more ideas of what to do. So, very interesting, you know, this whole thing about furniture and space and that kind of thing. It is so important. It's so important. So we're hoping to get that grant. And to do a little creative things with that.
So it sounds to me like for your wishes, you're thinking about your physical space, like the setup of your furniture, and also finding the time or a way to fit in more creative writing in those structures.
More creative. Okay. Because I'm very, and I'm old school, a little bit old school, you know, in that they need to learn to do it this way, so that when they write that college essay, you know, it looks and has all those pieces that it needs to.
And that was my struggle too, at talking about, you know, where I'm coming up completely from scratch. This it felt like building a curriculum, to be perfectly honest. I was trying to find every day, like, what are we going to do tomorrow that connects to transition words and this, and I didn't have any type of program, anything to work with. I had to come up with something completely. So it was really, okay, my only requirement here is these three standards, these three genres, and the fact that I have to prepare them for this big monster at the end of the year, the Georgia Master. Like, that's like, you look forward, exactly. So you don't have the pressure of stakes test, but then such a big component of this test is the writing part, the essay part, and then how are they going to get ready for the essay part? So, and then to be perfectly honest, that wasn't even crossing my mind until, you know, it gets to this time of year where everybody's like, it's January, it's time to get ready. So, you know, I came across the same things too of, okay, how am I going to create this type of environment that it's creative, they enjoy it, but they're still ready to do, they're prepared to write a traditional writing piece that you're going to need to do to, apply for college or apply for a job. You're able to understand what's the difference between the narrative genre and the informational genre, because of course, working in any type of school setting, you want to be as dreamy as you can, but you still have certain, thoughts, standards, and requirements to fill in. So I encountered that same thing. So we'll talk about that. So tell me more about your wishes.
Of course, my main wish that we talked about a little bit before was stamina, length of writing, plus also staying on task and just writing the entire time. Our kids are a little lazy sometimes, and they write a couple of sentences. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
So we've really been working on making sure that they elaborate on their ideas and that they understand that a couple of sentences is not going to tell your reader everything that you want them to know. Writing for authentic purposes is another one of my wishes. Instead of, giving them something that is not real world, just a made up thing where they don't see the purpose behind it. But instead, assigning them writing for authentic purposes so that they see that there is a reason for their work. And it could possibly go to the governor, to the mayor, to the principal, whomever they're writing for, whoever their audience is. Teacher expectations, a lot of times our teachers will teach in the mini lesson or they'll teach in word study, and then they're not holding their kids accountable for those lessons in their writing. Our teachers conference during the independent writing time, so they are holding kids accountable. I don't want to say they're not holding kids accountable, but like for word study, if they've covered, a phonics pattern, then that needs to be transferring into their writing, and we need to be able to be seeing that in their writing, and they're not always looking for that kind of thing. And then, of course, students self-assessing also, keeping themselves accountable. That's something that we've been working on.
All right. So I'll talk about, in my classroom, I'll go backwards from yours. So for student self-assessing, a lot of the spaces that I like to use for that is author's share component. So that share out at the end, which could be 5 minutes, is really powerful in terms of how kids can look at writing, and then they're looking at writing from the perspective of a reader, which is where that feedback piece comes in. You're like, I want to know, you're telling me this story, and I want to know more about it. And also, a lot of times what we don't do with writing is we see these rubrics and we understand these rubrics, but we don't get kids involved with this rubric. We don't get kids involved in looking and understanding the rubrics or even creating rubrics. So sometimes in my classroom, we're looking at genre of writing, like we've just been working on constructed response. And if a constructed response is scored for 0, 1, and 2, we look at it, talk about what do you think you get to get a 0? What has to happen for someone to get scored a 0? What has to happen for someone to get scored a 1 or a 2? And they are looking, and we've looked at a lot of examples by now, so they could see, I can see that this one didn't really talk about what the question was that much. So if you're not talking about the question, I'm not sure if you really understood what you read. And that's all coming from them. So when you can kind of set out those mentor example pieces for them, they can see, okay, this one, I'm not really understanding what this person is saying, or I'm not really understanding if you really understood this article, and getting them involved in even creating those rubrics, and truly understanding what is it that we're looking for in whatever genre of writing we're talking about. And I found with my students that really getting them involved in understanding the different levels, they were so much clearer too in the feedback they gave one another. So it didn't even come from me being like, well, where are your transition words? Or like, could you have said something else instead of said? When they were really involved in what is the criteria of success here, we're really empowered to say, like, I really like the way that this person used descriptive language. They were using that language of, I love this descriptive language. I like the dialogue that you put in here. Maybe use a transitional word instead of a transitional phrase. So instead of saying next, you could say the next morning, something like that, to really help establish that setting and tone. So getting them involved in the kind of assessment piece takes a lot of weight too off the teacher. So if writing is very subjective. Teachers are often like, I don't know how to grade this, and I hear that from teachers at my school of, I don't know how to grade this. I don't know what to tell a kid of, this doesn't look clear to me. And they're just like, okay, I don't know how to make it clear. So what do I do? So really getting them involved in understanding that criteria. And then for teachers' expectations, I really try to emphasize the whole risk-taking piece in writing of just try it out, see how it goes. We like to look at other books and examples of, this is an example of how this famous author uses craft and elaboration. And we also want to treat writing, which kind of goes back to what you're saying for authentic purposes, we want to treat writing as something that you don't only do during the writing block. Writing doesn't just happen during this 45 minutes in the morning. We use writing in all different ways and to say all different things. So a couple examples that have happened in my classroom. When students finish work, always an early finisher option of what they can do is write. They can continue writing pieces that they've worked on already. You can have a basket of prompts, or, we have a little flip book in my classroom that Amazon. It's called like creative story starters, where they can flip it around and it'll give them a prompt like, what if a chair became invisible on a snow day? And they're just like, what? So they want to think about that story and tell that story, and it gives them practice and ownership over it. So involving that in even those like quick, like, okay, you got finished, you need something to do moments. But then also there was a day when last year, it was around February, we were transitioning between two units. We just finished informational. It was a Friday. We finished informational on Thursday. I'm like, we're not about to start a whole new unit on a Friday. Like, nobody wants to do that. So I told them, just write something. Like, you get 25 minutes, just let you write.
Give me some other examples of why I may have that occur.
It's steps with a specific process, not necessarily the writing process, but whatever your process is. And that it's done with that process, and it achieves a goal, or it's particularly thought-provoking or effective. There is a point to it of some sort.
Yeah, I didn't do anything about capacity for change, but mine was more on the impact to the audience, the intended audience, whether it's 1 or 100. So I said that powerful writing is more than written well. It has an impact on its audience to persuade, motivate, enlighten, or enrich. So kind of like where you
There's definitely a theme going on.
For them to think about how it can change them, because when you write, you don't realize you're forced to think about everything you're putting on the paper, everything you've read, everything you've experienced. So when you're thinking of these things, you're going to go into more detail, into more depth into yourself, and to use that moment to work out some things. And that the most powerful writing comes from some of the most tragic or horrific things you've lived through. Try to tap that in or tap into that, and for them to not fear going there, to explore that, because that's what they need to explore. That's what all the writers prior have done.
like an extension of the pathos.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we're hearing from everybody.
Oh, absolutely.
Did you want to
I would say, when looking at it in a communal text sort of sense, any writing that has the ability to influence, like you all are saying, to influence the person on the other side of the paper or the other side of the keyboard. The story is more than just expressing how you feel, but you may be expressing the thoughts of others who, like you said, have experienced these situations down the line. It really does, powerful writing resonates within the neutral space of what can be created from like minds or even different minds, which is why I really emphasize with student writers that the most powerful space is a blank space, because within it, anything can come of it, whether it's the story of destruction, the story of creation, a story of redemption. So powerful writing is anything that kind of invokes and emphasizes that neutral space.
That's awesome that you're borrowing over that archetypal aspect of negative space. I really like that. That's really cool.
Guys, I'm so sorry. Okay. But I looked at it as something it's more engaging and a bit and its purpose is to reach some type of goal in the end.
Cool. So do you mind if I put these up on the wall there? Is that okay? The little stickies here? And again, please include your name and email so I can send you all the cool stuff that we did.
Do you want to answer the question as well?
That'd be great, yeah. Sorry. I'll be right back.
So do yours do that being a essay contest? Have you heard that one yet?
No, we just did the I Have a Dream essay contest. Last year, my student won, so I really put it on them this year because I'm at MLK High School, right? So you got to win this. Don't embarrass me. Yeah, right. So we're just starting to, and I've released the assignment, but I haven't done any work on it. I want them thinking about it for the Poet Laureate contest. And I only require it at my AP level. The other ones, I just leave it as extra credit. And I don't know why my particular group, it's a very tight cultural group, and they tend to not want to do things like EOCs and map testing at all, even though the permanent numbers follow them and they know that. They know it, but they don't know it. But then when you say extra credit, it doesn't even matter if it's 1 point. They'll do anything. So the different levels I have are really different on what they'll do. So like the lower achieving students will do anything for 1 point of extra credit, but my high achieving ones will do anything to do extra and take it home and bring it back perfectly. I mean, I had a kid up till 6 a.m. the other day.
12, and we have 18 minutes to continue with this. So these are really awesome things that you're sharing. This is why I wanted to make it you guys focused, because you clearly have a lot of expertise to offer. So the next piece, I'll take that. The next piece is going to be. So I kind of was thinking about this, and I was thinking about like, okay, they're talking about like creating space for this stuff to happen. What we're talking about, right? Like there's like the physical space, right? Creating a physical space, but ultimately, what we really want to happen is create a psychological space, right, with the student. So I've kind of I've given you guys these different sticky notes, colors and stuff. Here's kind of a key. What are things that we can do to create a physical, do you think that would be really helpful to create a physical space that's going to really result in a desired psychological space? And it could be something that really like the students would see, something that they might hear, smell, they might feel, or like, this could be like seating as well for tactile, like structures, right? And it could be like taste as well. What are some things, take a few minutes to just kind of think about this, jot down ideas, and then come up, and also just, I kind of like think of the psychological space as being like the social aspect of a person, right? Like the interactions between people, the emotional aspect, and the cognitive. And then the emotional can include emotion, right? So just take a few minutes to think about that, jot down some ideas that you think would be really helpful to create that space physically that's going to result in like a sort of psychological space.
So we're working on writing an essay. I could not get with him at all.
So one thing that I found is that there is sort of a way that you can use those mini lessons a little, you can kind of tighten them up. And you can actually, because I think, is it fair to say that part of the frustration is finding the time to prepare for? Yeah, because it's like 4 to 6 pages, right? So one thing that when I went to New York and I went to a workshop, held by them. So one thing that they helped us with was how to read and prepare in 13 minutes or less. And so basically the first thing you do is you read through you spend 3 minutes reading through the lesson, ignoring all the sidebar stuff, all the coaching on the side, and only the mini lesson, right? So you spend just 3 minutes reading through it to get the gist. You spend 5 minutes then studying the teaching point. And so that's the one with a little flower by it. Make sure that you really understand the essence. And then you spend 3 minutes, this totals 13, I think. 6, 11. I think it tells 11. Spend another 3 minutes just reading the bowl, because that's really your directions. The stuff in between is how it might go, and what kids might say. But what's critical is that, and you've already discovered this, you can filter in like different mentor texts. Your kids are not going to say what she said, but the bold text always starts with a verb. You'll notice, like ask kids or show kids or demonstrate and that sort of thing. So use that to help with.
Anyone else? Come on, give me a
Maybe
song.
playing off the music thing.
Okay.
Tupac Shakur.
Give me a song.
Is it the? It's actually a poem, "The Rose That Grew from Concrete."
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an example. What would be another example of a revolutionary text?
We read a book called We Beat the Street with our kids. We read a book called We Beat the Street.
We beat the streets.
Yeah, We Beat the Streets.
We beat the streets.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have heard that book, but we read that book with our kids.
Okay. So I'm gonna give you some other examples. We brought in Freedom Song by Bob Marley. We brought in, I'm gonna forget the name of it. Oh my God. It was by 21 Savage, which is I did not know who he was until that day, and my students literally started dancing when they saw the lyrics. So now that's a trickier one because that has profanity, and I'm not sure what your classroom situations may be. But anyway, we brought that piece into and analyzed it right next to traditional classic texts that are seen as revolutionary. And what happened is, all of a sudden, our youth were able to critically analyze across time periods, linguistically, culturally, and from a literary standpoint. All because we brought in 21 Savage. Because bringing in a song that they know, what did it do? It motivated them. What else did it
Made
do?
what you were teaching feel relevant to them.
Made it feel relevant. What else?
They could connect to.
They could connect. It immediately honored who they were. So, that's a good example of how you might use visualization, doodling, to create bridges between your students and with your students. Okay? One other example I will share is performance. How many of you have had to walk your students through revision of a piece? Raise your hand. Everybody. And how many of you only revise your color?
Corrected by them. Astounded or amazed by them.
You're fine. I was gonna get around.
Sometimes shocked by them.
Social. I don't know. We try all sorts of social stuff in my class.
So, I'm just gonna start reading some names out. Actually, I'm gonna ask for that.
0.
We don't do social.
Taste and social. I do nothing for taste. I mean, like, you're not eating in my room.
Oh yeah, I didn't really need you. Yeah, I didn't really need you to. No, yeah, I hear what you're saying. So yeah, so you're saying when it comes to taste, nothing. Don't eat in the room. Got it.
I do Starburst jelly beans.
Clean, light smells, coffee, seating arrangement. From my experience, opens up a more comfortable social space. Mini debates, groups of 3. This is the social piece here. Cool. And then you've got emotional. So Febreze scent for the olfactory. Febreze scent in the room. For the visual, you've got inspiring quotes. Discuss what they mean. Song lyrics. Man, it's like me. That's okay. That was not my next. That was what I was gonna play next, by the way. Man, I don't know who put that there. But
That's on my door and to my classroom. I have mirrors and to that song on my door.
my kids, when they get tired of that, what I just played, they're like, I'll play like Michael Jackson list, and they're like totally into that too. So, all right. So, various forms of music may incite a different emotional space for student writers. This is the auditory piece. Begin class with their music. Cool. That's cool. You can actually like create a Google form and ask them to like submit like songs and stuff. That's a really great way to compile a list. And then Michael Jackson on Pandora. Sixth period.
Each class has their own theme. They all like different themes.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Michael
Creative
Jackson,
writing
they
time.
love,
Fifth period likes Disney musicals.
The
Units
girls,
equals.
they writing constantly, but they're busting out in song. It's crazy.
That's cool. And then it says units determines background music?
Yeah, a lot of times, like the Native American unit, they'll play the music. So the units will repurpose in the background.
Cool. Writing conference, so cognitive writing conference, teachers, student, small groups, writing circles, books, computers, so this is the tactile or touch, books, computers, books again, tablets, books again, cool, so books, good.
That's me. Sorry.
Pictures, visuals, so this is visual, so look over here. Tactile, writer's notebooks, space to record daily writing, expression, like the visual, pictures, visuals, relevant topic, accessible literature, exposure to good writing, mentor texts, writing that has meaning for students, anchor charts. For taste, you've got a blind taste testing would be an interesting way to create a sort of cognitive space. Cool. Thinking snacks. What's the thinking
I have
snacks?
clean floors.
There are certain kids in certain classes who can't really focus unless they're thinking snacks. So there's a drawer in my room and they go grab a thinking snack and then they're able to cognitively move on. Random kids.
Random. Got you. Cool. That's cool. That's a good idea. Because if you're hungry, you can think, right? Cool. Very cool. Students conversate, right? Speaking to students, students speaking, students expression. Cool. All right. So I'm speeding this up because I really want to make sure you guys get a chance to talk about this stuff right here. Okay. So this is for each of you to take one of each. One of each of these colors here.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. And so I want to push towards lesson design, okay? Like with the focus on critical literacy, right? Like power, justice, and fairness. The yellow piece here that I'm giving you is about choosing and creating content and text. Whatever you want to on this about this is going to help us teach towards this, right? Like when it comes to creating or choosing content and text, it could be about how you go about doing it. It could be about specific texts and content that you think should be featured on the foreground of, or woven throughout the curriculum. Instructional methods and learning activities is the green one. Okay, so like the things that you think would be very helpful for teaching towards this, right? And creating that space that we've been talking about, and those spaces we've been talking about. So here's the yellow. And hopefully we can get this. So right now it's 10:24. So take a few. And this is like
We've been working on, like a lot of the days before, we were just writing a whole bunch of essays to just get them prepared and working in that time frame. We just did essay after essay after essay after essay. But I wanted them to be working with like really rigorous and challenging ideas. I wanted them to be thinking. So they were writing essays about like global water issues or how Ruby Bridges compares to the women's suffrage movement. And like, they were writing about a zoo in Kabul and how it could have been rebuilt. And then the essay question ended up like, how volunteer? They were like, what? Or then the opinion one was, is it better to have a sibling or be an only child? But then I was looking, of course you want to like peek at what they're doing. Like they were writing like, you may believe that having being an only child is a great idea, but let me tell you some reasons that you may be. I was like, oh my God, look at this. And they were like, that was so easy. I got a 4 on that. That was great. And then it came back and they did really well. So, it's just thinking about, I have strengths, I have these limitations, but what can I do to make small changes? Sometimes I have to reinvent the wheel. I got to rearrange this classroom from top to bottom, but how can we use the time we already have, the space we already have, and make just these small changes? And really think about, we don't want to just be teaching writing, we're teaching writers. And that distinction for them makes a big difference. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight either. It starts with, we have to really build up those attitudes for them, that this is not just, oh, here you go. Now it's like, oh my God, well, let me write about a time I went to the mall and that this thing happened to me. And they're just, because they're not invested. They don't care about those topics and those issues. So even having them sometimes like, tell me a couple topics we can write about today. What's a couple things you can write an informational essay about? I make a list. All right, go do it. And if there's something that's not on this list, if you write me an essay, I'm cool. Like, I'm fine. So, and they really look forward to that time. They hate not having writing in the morning. and their notebook is like this precious thing to them. That's like, I feel like every other subject's notebook has been lost at this point by at least one person, but that's the one
Yeah.
that I
That
have kept.
every
And then
other
there's
still
some kids who
has.
have like filled theirs up because they use that free time always to write. So there's like, I'm done, I don't have any more space, what am I gonna do? So we have to think about ourselves and what's going on in my context right now, in my environment. So let's just spend the time we have left, and I want you to think, well, I'll give you another piece of paper. Looking back at those wishes, and think about what's a kind of action plan that you can put in place on Monday, or what's going to take you maybe even a bit more time to think about, of what changes can I make that are really going to empower my students to feel like they're confident writers? What changes maybe can you make to the physical space, to the structure of what's going on? Think about maybe what you see in your classroom that's not happening. What would you like to see the students doing more of?
Because I think some teachers
Having a text that exists in front of your youth and then bringing in a rose and concrete is rose and concrete is dripping with voice, right? But have your youth feeling what that voice and that sound is. What does it sound like? And then push that back and say, okay, now when I'm reading your story about Patches, which is my cat who died and we cried together. But anyway, so if I'm sharing my story about Patches, then I ask, so what emotion do you want me to feel? Okay, why is this special for you?
I wanted to share. I actually just did that, so I won't claim to be an expert, but I love the mentor text just because it's to explain to the students, this is how great writers have done it. And sometimes even when I write, I can't come up with an example that I feel is sufficient. So I really depend on my mentor text and just pieces of it. And what do you feel? I make them close their eyes. And I teach 6th grade, never want to teach 8th grade. By the way. But one challenge that I have is her challenge is style. I am trying to teach them the structure because I feel that they are lacking in that area. And so maybe I'm thinking about my 8th grade teachers. I'm wondering if I'm doing a disservice by teaching them more in a more, I hate to say formulaic, but with the structure, it seems that they don't get it if I don't teach it in a more structured, consistent, this is what you have to have first, and I'm depending on my 7th and 8th grade teachers to, after they have the foundation, that they can teach them to explore and connect with their own personal style. But I think they need to have the foundations first. So I would love to get some feedback from, the 7th and 8th grade teachers. Am I doing this wrong? Should I stop doing this? Because too many of my 6th graders, they don't even have the basics. You know what I mean?
What do you guys think for those who teach 7th and 8th?
I think it needs to be a gradual release. I think that at the 6th grade level, they should be focusing on the structure. I don't use the word formula. The structure of writing, because, for example, just last week, we're writing speeches in 8th grade, and I'm talking about starting with a hook, and my kids are like, oh, that's my 4th sentence. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not. They have no clue.
Well, and that's what I mean about, so the hook is the first, and this is, and it's and I even go as far as, and I'm putting it out here, this is in our comfortable space. I connect it to, in your math class, this is, your teacher will give you a formula. So when I'm teaching them, I'm teaching you right, your hook needs to go at the beginning. It shouldn't be in the 4th, I'm looking for hooks, and it needs to be at the top. Your introduction must be at the top for now. When you become a more advanced writer, you can get more creative. But right now, you just need to show me that you know the basics.
I give mine a framework.
I
feel guilty.
That's me right there. I feel,
that's
but
why I
because
want the
with
style.
6th grade, I feel that the frame is necessary until they can show me that they can do it. Now, I have other writers who don't need that.
Right.
They don't get the frame.
Right.
They fly free, but there are a good number of them who need that frame because if I don't put a blank space up there, a line, they will sit there and they will not write a thing.
When we had a panel, one of our artists said this: you have to know the rules before you break them.
Yes.
So being able to do that differentiated instruction where you know who needs the framework, who doesn't, and then allow your youth to understand why one needs it and one doesn't, also allows them to give something to kind of strive to. One final thing I'll say before we come back is bring your own writing into the space.
Okay, I hate to stop our wonderful discussion, but I also want us to be able to share out with everyone and share the wonderful ideas that we've gotten and just sort of debrief the discussions that we had in the process. So maybe we'll kind of go in reverse order. Can we start with Jesse's group with high school? Can you guys talk a little bit about your thoughts, what stood out to you, what some of your discussions were about? Maybe
So, I'll go here. I think one of the things, if I were to summarize this entire discussion, is that we really talked about teaching to the whole child, teaching to all of their needs and everything, and setting your classroom up so that you've achieved that by looking at, we talked about visual, auditory, olfactory, tactile, touch, and taste. You're getting every aspect there and pulling that into your classroom so that students remain engaged.
And I see he did that here, right? Yes. That's wonderful. Anything else from anyone else that stood out?
So this is a great group, by the way. Like, a lot of awesome ideas exchanged. It was really more about them than me. I just kind of set it up, but like basically we did an intro to get to know each other, talked about what writing is, like what we consider writing to be, what powerful writing is, and there were some some kind of trends I think we found from there. Then it was about creating the physical space that creates the desired psychological space that we're after when it comes to pursuing critical literacy, right? And like working towards empowerment of historically marginalized groups, working towards justice and fairness. And this is just my way to try to get them to, us to think about like intentionality with the space and the different ways that students interact with the space. And then here, there's a really great list of ideas that I'm going to share with everybody via email later. But it's about choosing and creating content and texts, and also about instructional methods and learning activities. So I have the emails and we'll put it all out. So thank you all for everything.
Awesome, thank you. Sounds like a lot of really good brainstorming. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go in age order. So middle school, what are some of your thoughts?
We talked a lot about having an open space where students feel comfortable bringing in whatever their experiences are and having that honored in so many different ways that go from, the student who is more hesitant to talk in front of their class, being able to doodle their thoughts and have those dictated and working in groups and just so many different strategies.
Can you share some other folks share what strategies sort of stood out to you that support those students?
I liked instead of like revising a student's paper for them, having a conversation with them and actually dialoguing with them and asking them questions about their writing to get them to talk about it and to own it, and that you want to understand what they're writing.
I like the idea of the doodling for those students who they get stuck and they have one or two words and you come back 15 minutes later and they may have a third word. I like the idea of being able to doodle, and then maybe the idea that came to me was they could doodle a picture out and then maybe they could do voice to text or have another student, he gave us the idea, another student help them compose their thoughts or maybe assess them on something, and maybe they could just verbally tell you and they could be assessed in that way. I'm excited about that. That's great.
So validating their thoughts, even though they may be having difficulty getting them out. There's a lot that we can see going on in their heads. Awesome. Anything you want to add?
Just that we focused a lot on this theme of fostering fearlessness within your youth, but also understanding that as an educator, you first have to do it yourself. I often say that I won't do anything anything I don't ask of my students, I won't do, and vice versa. So if I won't do it, I won't ask them to do it, and that is an part in doing so. We also talked really quickly about language. So referring to your youth as children in front of them is, to them, disrespectful. So you won't get engagement with them if they think you are treating them like a kid, but to honor them by calling them their artists, or a young leader, or whatever that is, that you know they will kind of perk their ears up to is nice. But also I talked about the importance of naming. So your child or your students or your young artist's name is their crown. And oftentimes what we found from our youth is they remember the teacher who refused to say their name, who mispronounced their name and refused to learn how to say it correctly. And as a result, they kind of put their teacher on their target list of like, I'm not going to learn from you because you don't respect me. So being able to work with your youth as a co-experiencer, co-leader, co-creator, you imbue them with respect, and then you get that back. And then as a result, they are then going to push themselves a lot harder to do what you know they can do.
Beautiful. Thank you. Awesome. Okay. Grades 3 through 5. Our grades are getting smaller. Our tables are getting smaller. So, thoughts?
We talked a lot about creating the culture of students seeing themselves as writers and seeing the purpose behind their writing, that their writing could potentially change the world, and that it's not just another assignment or another subject in school, another thing that they have to do, but that their thoughts mean something, and to get those thoughts out on paper, is important. And just encouraging them to take risks with their writing, to study authors' work, to find those craft moves that authors make, and to try it out, just to see what happens. So.
Anything to add?
Yeah, so we discussed a lot about thinking about, instead of I am a writing teacher, I am a person who teaches writers, and really viewing your students as all of them have stories, all of them have things to say, they all have interest. So making small tweaks and the structures that we may be confined in a public school setting, a private school setting, or I only have an hour with students in whatever setting we work with, but thinking about what small changes can I make within the framework I'm working in to really put the power on my students, to make them feel like I'm not just doing a writing assignment because it's a grade. I'm not just doing a writing assignment because I need to, because my teacher told me of. I can write as a means of expression and looking more beyond like, oh, I have to do this because it's writing time and it's going to be writing time from 9 to 10 o'clock.
Right. The essence of what writing is really, really about. Right. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, and so then the smallest group of all, which was our group, pre-K through second. So this is Terry. Terry and I had a very nice one-on-one conversation. So Terry, would you like to share some of your ideas?
I had some great private tutoring. I did hear some common things, maybe at different levels, but we talked about many of the same things that you all did. One thing that I'm going to take away, and there are many things, but one big thing that I'm going to take away today is that I need to let go a little bit of what I need them to do and let them show me what they want me to do. That's kind of my biggest thing, I think. We get all tangled up in the requirements and the standard grades and all that, and these babies are literally just learning how to write at this age, and so letting go of a little of that.
Yeah. There are a lot of pressures that we're all experiencing that can be distracting from the real work. And so that's the beauty of conferences like this that allow us that reflection time, the time to breathe and to remember what it is that's important, and then allows us to create goals for ourselves on how to be intentional about making space. Ourselves as teachers, and then for the kids as well, to be powerful writers and powerful teachers. So thank you guys so much for taking part in our session, and we're hopeful that you have a lot that you can bring back. And thank you so much for sharing your ideas with us as well. Thank you.